There was a time when a simple toothache could kill you, slowly, painfully, over the course of weeks, with absolutely nothing anyone could do about it. We don't think about pain that way anymore. Today, a toothache means an inconvenient trip to the dentist, maybe a day of discomfort, a bit of sensitivity to cold water. But for most of human history, that same small ache in your jaw could be the beginning of the end, and understanding what our ancestors actually did about it reveals something unsettling about how fragile survival really was, right up until shockingly recently. If uncovering the hidden, uncomfortable side of history is your kind of thing, this is exactly why this channel exists. So go ahead and subscribe before we get into what's coming next. To understand what a toothache actually meant thousands of years ago, you first have to understand what caused it in the first place. And here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. Tooth decay wasn't always common. Skeletal evidence from early hunter-gatherer populations shows remarkably healthy teeth, worn down from a coarse diet, but largely free of the cavities that plague modern mouths. Their food was tough, fibrous, low in sugar, and their teeth, while heavily used, weren't rotting from the inside. Then agriculture happened. Around 10,000 years ago, as humans shifted toward farming grains and eventually refining them into softer, starchier foods, something changed inside the human mouth. Skeletal records from agricultural societies show a dramatic spike in tooth decay compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. More carbohydrates meant more fuel for the bacteria living on human teeth, and those bacteria produce acid that slowly eats through enamel. In other words, one of humanity's greatest achievements, farming, the very thing that allowed civilization to exist, also quietly created a new kind of suffering nobody saw coming. So once a cavity did form, and it inevitably reached the nerve, what happened next? The pain would have been extraordinary. Dental nerves are some of the most sensitive tissue in the human body, and once decay reaches that nerve, the resulting infection creates a specific, relentless kind of agony that modern people rarely experience for more than a few hours before medication or treatment. Ancient humans didn't have that option. An infected tooth could throb for days, weeks, sometimes months, and if the infection spread into the jawbone or bloodstream, it could become fatal. Historians estimate that dental infections were a leading cause of death in the ancient and medieval world, long before germ theory existed to explain why. People didn't know bacteria caused the problem. They just knew the pain was unbearable, and they'd try almost anything to make it stop. And that's where the real story begins. Some of the earliest evidence of dental treatment comes from a discovery that completely reshaped what we thought we knew about ancient medicine. Researchers examining a 14,000-year-old tooth from northern Italy found something remarkable. Tiny scratch marks inside a cavity, evidence that someone had deliberately scraped out the decayed material using a small, sharp tool, essentially performing dentistry thousands of years before anything resembling modern medicine existed. That discovery mattered because it proved something people had assumed was impossible. Ice Age humans weren't just suffering helplessly. They were actively trying to treat the problem, using whatever tools and knowledge they had, showing a level of medical understanding far more advanced than most people ever imagined for that era. But scraping out decay was only the beginning. As human societies evolved, so did the desperate attempts to manage dental pain. Ancient Egyptian texts describe pastes made from herbs, honey, and even ground insects, applied directly to aching teeth in hopes of easing the pain or stopping the infection. Some cultures believe toothaches were caused by tiny worms burrowing inside the tooth, a myth that persisted for thousands of years across wildly different civilizations, from ancient Mesopotamia all the way through medieval Europe. To treat it, healers would sometimes burn specific seeds near the mouth, believing the smoke would drive the worm out, unaware they were dealing with bacteria, not parasites. Other treatments were far more direct and far more brutal. Historical records describe teeth being pulled using crude tools, sometimes by traveling barbers or blacksmiths rather than anyone resembling a modern dentist, often without any form of anesthesia beyond alcohol, herbal sedatives, or simply being held down by several strong hands. There's a detail buried in medieval European records that's easy to miss but hard to forget once you know it. In many towns, the person pulling teeth wasn't a physician at all. It was often the same barber who cut your hair, using many of the same tools for both jobs. That's not a coincidence of history. It's the literal origin of why old barber poles are striped red and white, the red representing blood, the white representing the bandages used to stop it. A haircut and a tooth extraction, performed by the same hands in the same chair, was simply how medieval towns functioned for centuries. Here's the detail that tends to stop people cold. For most of human history, having a rotten tooth pulled was considered lucky. It meant the source of the pain was finally gone. The alternative, an infection left untreated, spreading slowly into the jaw and bloodstream, was so much worse that losing a tooth felt like a victory rather than a loss. Think about that the next time you casually mention needing a filling. For nearly all of human history, that same conversation would have ended with someone reaching for pliers and a bottle of whiskey. But perhaps the most surprising twist in this entire story isn't about the pain itself. It's about what dental problems reveal about entire civilizations. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have found that dental health can reveal astonishing details about a person's life. The pattern of decay, wear, and abscesses can indicate diet, social status, occupation, and even how a society was structured. In several ancient populations, researchers found that wealthier individuals, who had access to imported sugar and refined foods unavailable to the general population, actually had significantly worse teeth than everyone else. In some historical records, rotten teeth were, strangely enough, a subtle marker of wealth, because only the rich could afford the sugary foods destroying their mouths in the first place. Which means for a brief, strange window in human history, a mouth full of pain was, in its own dark way, a symbol of privilege. Meanwhile, poorer populations eating rougher grains and less refined food often kept the healthier teeth their hunter-gatherer ancestors had, simply because they couldn't afford the very foods that were quietly destroying the smiles of the elite. Wealth, in this one strange corner of history, bought suffering just as easily as it bought comfort. This is where the story stops being about the distant past and starts connecting directly to something happening inside your own mouth right now. Every time you wince biting into something cold, every time you feel a small twinge reaching for a piece of candy, you're experiencing an ancient vulnerability that has existed since the moment humans started eating processed food. Modern dentistry didn't eliminate that vulnerability. It just gave us the tools to manage what our ancestors could only endure. Fluoride, anesthesia, antibiotics, precision drilling, all of it exists specifically because dental pain was, for most of human history, one of the most common and most unbearable forms of suffering a person could experience. The dentist's chair many people dread today represents one of the single greatest quality of life improvements in human history, even if nobody walks in thinking about it that way. So the next time you sit down in that chair and feel that small flicker of nervousness before the appointment even begins, remember what that same experience would have meant just a few centuries ago. No numbing gel, no modern tools, just pain, endurance, and whoever in the village happened to own a decent pair of pliers. That brief discomfort you're bracing for isn't a burden. It's proof of exactly how far we've come. Somewhere, in the space between an old rotten tooth and a modern filling, lies one of the quietest, most overlooked triumphs of human history.